Welcome back to the podcast, guys. Today I have Laynie with me. I am super stoked for this conversation because we're going to talk about all things money. And I love this topic. I know she loves this topic. And I know you guys listening to this love this topic. So me and Laynie have known each other for, gosh, I bet it's been 5 or 6 months now that I think about it. But before I get into that, why don't you just go ahead and tell us a little more about yourself, okay?
Okay. Hi. Thank you so much for having me, Sasha. My name is Laynie, and I kind of like to say how I landed in financial services was through a series of accidents and really was not intentional by any means, but I landed there and I started to find passion helping people and being intrigued by the markets and what all the jargon meant, and just one thing kind of led into another. And now I manage money for clients, and I have my own investment firm. I've worked at several different big banks, and I kind of joke with people that in 2009 is when I started as a financial advisor, actually March 12th, which is significant in the sense that March 9th of 2009 was the bottom of the last bear market we've seen so far, and the Dow closed at like 65.42. And why that number is significant is because I remember thinking, oh my goodness, what did I just commit to doing? Because at that point there was so much fear in investor psyche that people thought the Dow Jones was going to go to zero. So for just a little bit of reference, because I'm a numbers geek, the Dow Jones is currently above 25,000. So 10 years later, here we are. So that's a little bit about me and how I got started. And then recently, just from my 10 plus years in financial services, prior to becoming an advisor, I worked in different capacities. I worked in administration and operations and in compliance. So I had the benefit of kind of learning every aspect of the business. But I then got to this point where I really felt like the market had a void for women really bringing and pouring financial literacy to other women. And there was this huge void in having somebody kind of encourage women to become their own financial ambassadors. And so my passion and my drive there is to kind of encourage, empower, and equip women to step into their own best financial life. Now, for me, it's all been a result of the fact that I'm single and I've had to make some big life decisions and choices and directions. And I always thought that at this juncture of my life, I'd be married. And as a result of not having that partner, I've been lucky enough to do these things on my own, but there's been a lot of mistakes I've made along the way that I wish to share with other people to hopefully help avoid you from making some of those mistakes. But more importantly, regardless of your social, your status of being married or single, I still think women need to understand all the components about money, about their investments, about their projection for retirement. And I just think that there's a big void in having somebody pour that into other women. So that's a little bit about me.
I love it. I'm like taking notes. I'm like, ooh, let's talk about this. So before we get into like the tangible steps on, how somebody can maybe like create a budget or create wealth, like you talked about, you've made a lot of mistakes. What would you say was like the biggest mistake where you're like, oh, hell no, I have to change this for, my financial future, my daughter's financial future, however that looks?
So I think a couple of the biggest mistakes I made was listening to the wrong people. And I think, which has me so passionate about kind of changing that blueprint. But I work in an industry that's primarily male dominated. So to give you a little bit of insight, the average advisor across like the Bloomberg studies is 57 to 60. There's less than 5% of financial advisors that are under the age of 40, which is a staggering statistic because as we're going into this aging population, I just see there's so much momentum for turnover of advisors that really need to kind of hang up their computer screen and peace out. But larger than that, there's like less than 10% of financial advisors are women. And I just think it's one of those environments where it's such a relationship-based business that it's really an opportunity to kind of soar. But so when I say making I took advice from the wrong people. I was new in the business. I was enamored by just the notion of investing. I didn't come from that background. My parents were of modest means and very comfortable middle class, but I never heard my parents talk about investing. I didn't really, know what the stock market was. Like I'd see the little, the Dow Jones closed at, and it meant nothing to me. People talk about the markets up or down. I'm like, okay, whatever. So I'm new in the industry. I'm starting to make some money. They're talking about 401ks and doing your enrollments. And so I listened to some of the advisors in my office that quote unquote deemed themselves as experts. And they took more risk than I think, than I'm comfortable taking. But more importantly, they kind of had a one size fits all approach. And I think that when it comes to investing, it's not a one size fits all approach. And that's a whole nother kind of iteration of the dialogue. But so one of the mistakes I made was listening to the wrong people. The second mistake I made was having a low mindset around money. And I think that was probably the biggest one that I'm so excited to kind of change that narrative around people. I know there's so much resources about money mindset, but what I really, really never realized was your self-worth and your net worth are directly correlated. And if you allow yourself to be at a low vibration, then everything around you, whether it's money, relationships, health, is going to be at that low vibration. But when you start changing that methodology in your mind and you start showing up different in life, then all of those things show up differently. And part of my story was I walked away from a very safe partnership because I felt I wasn't valued for the contribution I was making. And I built my own book of business. So I walked away completely and said, after 6 months of bartering with you, if you don't see my worth, I'm moving on. And it was a risky move because it was it was kind of like leaving a corporate job and starting your own business. And it turned out to be wildly successful for me. But I think those are the two biggest mistakes I've made that I hope to encourage other people not to make.
Yeah, I've taken some very bad financial advice from people who should not have been giving me advice. And so I kind of learned the hard way. And I was in financial services for a few years, so I'm familiar with some of the concepts that you're talking about. But when would somebody need to hire a financial advisor, and kind of what role does that take with you helping somebody and their money?
So that's an excellent question. I think that can be a little bit, I'm going to broaden this down a little bit, but I think that there should always be dialogue, and there should always be kind of a person that you might aspire to work with if you're not at a platform. Every broker dealer is a little different, and that term broker dealer means whether or not you're your own clearing firm or you work at a big financial institution. So they have kind of the break evens on where the numbers make sense to hire an advisor. But I typically tell people you have to have at least $250,000, whether that's in retirement money, whether that's in money you saved. But 250 is kind of the number that it starts to make sense. It's equitable on both sides of the relationship. One thing I will mention that I find to be super prevalent is people switch jobs, and when they switch jobs, they usually have a 401k that they kind of set it and forget it and don't necessarily think of. I call them orphan 401ks. So I always advocate that people find a way to streamline things, because when you're no longer, in general terms, when you're no longer working with a company and you still have your 401k and you haven't taken it and rolled it into a self-directed IRA, and that stands for individual retirement account, it's not always in your best interest to leave it with your previous employer. So that's always just a nugget for people to kind of do a financial checklist and clean house a little bit, because you move on to the next thing and you forget about some of the benefits you may have. So I would say that the rough number is around 250. And if you don't have that number, I think you should still engage with a financial advisor and kind of get some kind of a guideline as to what it would take to work with somebody, because at any given point, that I think should be one of the things people aspire to, because everybody's working for retirement, essentially working to have a paycheck that continues on in their life. So wherever you are in the path, I think you should have a person that you can check in with, even if you're not at that threshold. So for example, I probably have a dozen people in I call them my prospecting network, where they're not at that level yet, but once a year we check in, I look at their 401k and how they have it allocated. We talk about what progress they've made with debt liability, for example. And then we kind of talk about some things that they should focus on for the current year to get them to a point where they'd be closer to working with a financial advisor myself in that scenario.
I love that. I really love that. That's incredible. Okay. So now I want to ask you, as far as like budgeting and stuff like that goes, like what are some basic steps for the woman listening to this that has like no financial education, doesn't even know to take the first step? That's kind of where I started, was getting a control on my spending, my debts, my credits, all of these reoccurring things. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, I'd love to. So I get a little excited about this kind of topic because
you and me both.
I'm a little bit of a nut when it comes to this, but so I, regardless of like religious beliefs, I hope I don't offend anybody. I'm personally a Christian. My church is sponsored, has collaborated with Dave Ramsey. So a few years ago, I went through Financial Peace University as an initiative our church was putting out. I'd heard of Dave Ramsey. I didn't know a lot about him, but I, respected him. So going through Financial Peace University, kind of go through his whole blueprint, for example. And I disagree with a lot of stuff he talks about, respectfully. And I have kind of some of my own thoughts around it. The time I went through Financial Peace University, I was probably not the candidate for his ideal avatar. I didn't have any debt other than my mortgage. I had a savings account. I had an emergency fund. I had a rhythm going. So I wasn't kind of the bare bone person that he kind of markets to. And then I had also listened a lot to Susie Orman. She's kind of fallen a little bit from maybe the limelight, if you will. But part of what surged this whole passion for me is I just felt like you have Dave Ramsey that is kind of middle market, very basic. And you had somebody like Susie Orman who might be a little aggressive in some of her approaches. And she's also not a fan of financial advisors. So that always bothered me. To each their own, but there is a necessity for my industry. There's good advisors and there's bad advisors, but generalizing them I find to be a little frustrating. As a whole, not a good thing. But anyways, so my thing about budgeting is I think that the first and foremost is I notice that people often say they can't afford things. And sure, there's some things you probably, realistically speaking, can't afford. I will put myself out there. For example, I can't afford to fly first class. Not an option. It's not where I would spend my money, even if it were an option, but that's not a reality for me. That's not something I actually put importance on. But as an example, like, sure, there's certain things you can and can't afford. But what I really find interesting is most people make that statement without having a foundation of knowing where they really stand. So they don't know where their money's going. They don't know how much they're making per se. They're kind of just flying from the seat of their pants. So what I like to say is in starting budgeting, first and foremost, you kind of have to create a plan. And once you create that plan, then you start to decide where you want to direct your money. And I always tell people prior to starting the actual budgeting, take 7 days, track everything you spend. It's a pain in the ass, I get it, but it's so enlightening and it's so mind-boggling when you start to really take a look at things. And this is a broad-based example, but often I see people after that 7 days, they check in with me. There's some apps I like that I can share with you later if you want to put on your show notes. But what I find interesting is at the end of that 7 days, people are always their minds are blown at where they're kind of wasting money. And so I always like to tell people money is going to go where you direct it. It's just an exchange system. It flows in and out. There's going to be seasons where you have more, seasons you have less, seasons you need to make choices where you maybe refrain from doing certain activities or you have priorities that are more important. So I like to tell people after that 7 day process, to then sit down and create a plan. And you break it down on essentials and non-essentials. And I break things down for myself on short-term and long-term. And then you start kind of plugging in numbers based on what you're earning, what you're taking home. And most importantly, my number one thing is always pay yourself first. So if you work for a big corporation or you have the access to a 401k, make sure you're contributing to that. It's so important. It's taken out. You don't even think about it. But I find a lot of people don't even go through that exercise. So once you kind of have that blueprint down, then you start looking at your patterns and you make the allocations. Now, one way I'm different from Mr. Ramsey, which I respect him immensely, we just have different thought processes. I don't know anybody that really uses the envelope system. In theory, it's awesome. It makes sense. It's good. But I kind of find that especially we're rolling into this cashless society where people just want to swipe their card, people want to Venmo, people want to send it via PayPal. So I don't know anybody that's going to carry envelopes and deal with that. So what I like to tell people is you place that in the category and then you take a look at where you're directing money. I mean, you can tell me where you disagree.
No, I did the envelope thing because I followed Dave Ramsey. Gosh, it's probably been, I don't know, 5 or so years ago, but that's kind of what helped me. This was before I was like into financial services. So it's probably even been longer than that, but I like read the book. Money Makeover maybe is what it was. And so like I did the envelopes for a while and I was like, man, this really sucks carrying around this much cash. Like it was not sustainable. And so I ended up switching all of my envelopes into like separate accounts. Like I would have like a pay myself account. I would have like a house bills account. And so I had like these separate things that I used that was all electronic. And that worked a lot better for me because I don't know. I'm not a cash person. I think that, and this is my personal opinion, but I think cash is kind of gross and it's, I don't know. I just carry around cards now. It's much easier. So,
well, I do agree with you. I feel like it's a little antiquated. And I also feel like, as life has changed and it changes for us, like, so now with, I have a toddler, I couldn't, sometimes I don't even know where my keys are. I couldn't keep track of envelopes on top of that. And
exactly.
I would be terrified of losing them. And then all of a sudden, like it's out the door. So
I've done that. I've literally left like $300 in a coat one time, could not find it until the next winter when I put that coat on. Sure as shit, there was my envelope.
So I find that it's not, it doesn't evolve well. And especially when I talk to millennials, there's no way they're doing that. There's and even below millennials, whatever they call that next. So I think the concept is good. I think that practical application leaves something to be desired. But if you have a budget and you're adhering to it, you don't necessarily need the envelope system. I like the intentionality behind your application of separate accounts, but even I find that to be a little cumbersome for some people because it's just, I want to find ways to make it so easy that there's no excuses. So I mean,
like
of course, it's going to take time. It's going to take some effort. But what I tell people that I work with on every level is you have to think of your money as a relationship and you're cultivating a new relationship. So like anything else, it takes time. You're kind of, I mean, well, money's not getting to know you, but you're kind of getting in a vibration, if you will. And you have to spend time doing it. I mean, or you hire somebody to do it for you, which most people listening to this probably aren't at the level where they can outsource that. I actually don't find it, I wouldn't aspire to that. But I think that by creating the budget, once you sit down and do the initial 7 days and kind of label things out, it's really not labor intensive. It's more autopilot from that point. It's so similar to people who say they want to lose weight and a trainer tells them to track their food and they say that's too hard. Well, then how much do you want to lose weight? You know,
exactly.
Like, well, you must not want it that bad. So, but meanwhile, like this is like an interesting statistic. So like 77% of people can actually afford a lot more than they really believe if they really truly looked at where they're allowing their money to go. So I always like to say it's kind of like the latte principle where small things add up to big things over time. So the first question I always ask people when they say it's too hard or I can't do it or I don't have time, I say, do you go to Starbucks? And then usually the answer is yes, or whatever your coffee shop jam is. How many times a week do you go to Starbucks? And most people say 7, and some people say more than twice a day. And then I quickly run the numbers. I'm like, if you go at $3.50 a day over the course of a year, that's $1,800. You take that $1,800 and you amortize it over 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. There's a whole lot of things that you could afford if you just made one simple choice to redirect money. Now, I'm not saying eliminate Starbucks. I'm not saying don't enjoy your life and live your life and have fun. I'm just saying, what if you looked at your patterns and you simply asked yourself, if I redirected this choice 4 times a week, 5 times a week, and allowed that money to go into a different bucket, what would I do with that? And so for me, like I'll give an example. I cut out Starbucks during the week. I allow myself to go twice in a week. So sometimes it's a Monday, sometimes it's a Friday, sometimes it's a weekend, but I just give myself twice a week where I can go to Starbucks, and I make coffee at home. I just changed my patterns, but I took that extra money that I was spending on Starbucks and I put it into a vacation fund. And that's what I use to build up for vacations that I want to take with my daughter.
I love that. And really, it's just bringing awareness to where your money goes. I think a lot of people get into the habit, at least my experience, I would get into the mindless spending, right? It was just like easy to click online purchases. And next thing you know, I'm having an Amazon package at my house, like every freaking day. You add that up, that's like $800, $1,200 a month that I would spend on things that was just, $20 here, $100 there, $50 there. But it's like, whoa, at the end of the month, I would get things that I didn't even know I was spending money on, kind of thing. And again, with the Starbucks or the coffee, I used to be a smoker, and cigarettes, I think, were like $6 a pack. I would buy, 4 or 5 packs of cigarettes a week. That's a ton of money. And so when you start to look into your habits and bring awareness into your spending habits, you can choose and be intentional about where your money goes. And then you talk about, putting it into a fund where your money can actually work for you and make more money.
Correct. I mean, I think that the word mindless, that's something that I constantly will bring to people's attention. And I always love to tell people it's only getting worse with social media and the way we consume as a society, because now you have those pixels. So you're on your phone, you're looking at something, you click a link and there's some cute shirt. And then next thing you know, it's like you see some on Facebook when you log in, you are scrolling, you see, oh, you might be interested in this shirt that you looked on Instagram. And because everything's being tracked of how you're consuming your time and your energy. And then it's like, click this link. And it's even getting more seamless. Like you can hit a code for Apple Pay to just kind of take it from there. So I always tell people it's the mindless part of it. And like, I know for me, I'm crazy about my lists. I'm a pen and paper kind of girl. A lot I do electronically, but a lot I still believe in pen and paper. But I have been super vigilant, about my list when I go to Target, because that is a place where I come out and I'm like, I just spent $400 and I went in for toothpaste. So
I am so guilty of that. I am a list taker now. I am a pen to paper person too. And I think that's why I like you so much. One of the reasons.
Well, I mean, I'm very intentional. It's the same thing when I hear trainers talk to clients, personal trainers talk to their clients about the grocery store, and they say, stay to the perimeter, because the perimeter of the grocery store has all the healthy stuff, I guess, except for the wine, the alcohol. But usually it's like the meats are in the back, the dairy's in the corner, the produce, and it's all the stuff in the middle that's like not necessarily the best choices for you.
Processed junk.
It's the same thing with walking into a store and not having a blueprint of why you're there and what it is you're hoping to accomplish. So my thing that I love to tell people about budgeting is that it's personal to you. It has to be intentional and it has to be sustainable. So I always tell people, start with small goals. Like, You don't, if you're seeking to run a marathon, you're not going to put yourself on a training schedule and expect yourself to run 10 miles in week one. No, you build up to it. So it's the same with budgeting. Start small and look at ways you can make some changes and have that momentum build upon itself. And I know for me, when I started in financial services, knowing nothing about the stock market, not having any money that my parents didn't really allocate money to us through mutual funds, or I didn't have a custodial account. Then when I magically turned 18, there was like a nest egg of money for me. I didn't have that. So I was so intrigued by like having an account. And I remember I, of course, lived paycheck to paycheck, had credit card debt, had a car payment. I mean, I was a hot mess. I remember my biggest goal was to pay off my credit card and to be able to save up $10,000 to open an investment account. And that $10,000 was like $100,000 to me. Like, it seemed impossible. But I slowly, by taking these steps, got to a point within 3 years, my credit card debt was paid in full, and I had saved up enough money to open my own investment account. And I mean, it took 3 years, it took time, but I did it. And then the vibration started to change from there. But without planning and without sticking to a plan, I would have never gotten there.
Oh, I love this. Okay, so that's going to lead me into the next thing here. And so after you kind of grasp your budget and figure out, okay, like I'm paying down my debt, I'm doing this, the next thing would be that wealth building. So can you talk about that?
Sure. So I get super excited about this as well, because I'm
very excited about this too.
So I would say, and I've read about all the different fund managers, all the big spearheads out there, and Warren Buffett is by far one of my favorites. I like Buffett and Dalio. Dalio wrote the book Principles, and he has a firm, Bridgewater, I think it's called, Bridgewater. He runs billions of dollars for people, but very altruistic and all about giving back to the community. But so those are two people that I really like. Their kind of investment processes and how they've amassed wealth. And I think the one thing I would say is, for me at this juncture, my end goal is to be able to retire when I want. I enjoy working. I enjoy what I do. So I don't have a hard set number of what that would look like, but to be able to retire when I want, to have multiple income streams. I personally, as somebody who came from financial services and watched the last financial crisis we had with subprime, in 2008, I bought my first piece of property, a condo that was like 700 square feet. And I remember thinking, everybody was teasing me that it was a shoebox. And I'm like, I live in Orange County. Do you know like what a big accomplishment this is? But I bought that condo, and I had an employee stock purchase plan where I was able to enroll in a plan where I could buy shares of the company that I worked for at the time on a bi-monthly program at a slight discount, and it built up over time. So I took the money that I had saved over years, probably like 6 years working at that investment bank, and I sold the stock to pay for my down payment on my home and to avoid the PMI. So if you don't put 20% down, then there's a secondary component to get you underwriting. So you have to basically split it from a primary and a second loan in order to qualify. Some of that might have changed a little bit, but at the time, that's what I was dealing with. Fast forward to 2000, I sold my stock at the beginning of 2008. By October of 2008, my company stock that I sold went from $90 a share to $7 a share. And pretty much everything in the financial sector had been clobbered. And I remember at the time, some of the advisors that had given me advice made comments to me about how the value of my condo dropped so much with the subprime crisis. And I remember thinking to myself, not to the same pace that my stock in this company dropped. Furthermore, I would not have qualified for the condo had I not diversified away that concentration of stock. So the things that I say about amassing wealth are that you should always focus on having multiple income streams. You should always have a systematic approach of how you diversify away your risk. And what I mean by that is taking money from your concentrated positions and making sure you sell a little bit of that to diversify into something else. So unlike a lot of advisors, by this point I was starting to trust my intuition and really kind of come across that this was like a really good industry for me, and that I was probably better than I was giving myself credit for. When with my 401k with my previous employer, the company match was in stock. And so most of the advisors recommended you put 100%. So you put your pre-tax contributions as well as the contributions the company makes, everything in stock. And I remember thinking to myself, that's the dumbest advice I've ever heard. And you're managing money for people? Like, why would you put all of your eggs in one basket? Mm-hmm. So I specifically created my pre-tax dollars that I put into my 401k. I put it into an asset allocation pool where I was covered in every sector of the market and every capitalization. And I allowed the company's stock, which I had no choice in, to be directed into stock. And the match was in stock. So in my mind, I'm like, I'm not going to double up my leverage here. And it turned out to be really sound advice for myself, because after the financial crisis, just to give you a little bit of content to this, the stock that I sold, and I'm not saying the name of the company intentionally, but the stock that I sold in 2008, I sold it at 92 and change. By the end of 2008, it was down to like $10 a share.
Man.
We rebound a little bit, and now 10 years later it's trading around $44 a share. So it's not even come back to where it was at that high water mark. So making sure that you're diversifying away your risk and not keeping your eggs in one basket is super important. And then I say, when you're trying to figure out what lines of income streams should you invest in, I say you kind of have to go with what works for you. So for me, I'm fortunate enough, when I bought my home that I live in now, I kept my condo and I turned that into passive income through real estate, through building up a real estate portfolio. And then there were some issues with that condo and I decided to sell it. And then I started investing in some commercial real estate for passive income with a team of people that I know very well. But I researched that market super diligently to make sure I understood the ins and outs, because one of the things people talk about with real estate investing is they tell you about best case scenarios. They don't talk to you about, well, what happens if the property is vacant? Well, what happens if once you bundle all of your expenses, you can't rent it out to make a profit? What happens if you're overly aggressive in amortizing down the property, and then you get hit with the big capital gain tax when you go to sell it? Like, there's all these ways that people talk about manipulating that space, but they don't kind of tell you the inner mechanics of what to be mindful of. And then of course, it really truly depends on the demographic of where you live. So where I live in Southern California in Orange County, real estate is really, it's hard to get in. It's super expensive. The areas that I would want to be in charge of that are lower price points may not be the areas that I would want, the demographic that I would want to work with. So you have to keep all those things in mind. And then the other component with real estate investing is a lot of people don't believe in using property management groups. And I disagree. I feel like if something happens, I don't want a phone call at midnight with, I need a plumber, I need an electrician, I need XYZ. Like, it's worth it to me to outsource that and to know somebody's in charge of all the components of that applies to that real estate. So basically, I think you need to be very clear on what resonates with you. So for example, I know a ton of people in multi-level marketing and they're making a ton of money, and that's one area. And I always tell those people, well, then find other ways to diversify that income so that you have other streams of income coming to you. So if you got a big bonus, maybe you invest in the stock market. Maybe I am not a proponent or fan of cryptocurrencies, but if that's your jam, invest in cryptocurrencies. If you want to invest in real estate, invest in real estate. But just make sure you're comfortable with the stream that you choose.
No, and I love that. So what would be some of the most common ones that you see aside from MLMs, stocks, and real estate?
Well, I mean, that's kind of hard because there's not, unless you're a small business owner, there's not really a lot of other streams outside of that, unless you have a business. I mean, so you have traditional way to make money is through employer, some sort of job, salary. Then you have these different iterations of multi-level marketing that's come to fruition. You have investing in the stock market, and there's different components there. And then you have investing in real estate. I'd say the other options would be commodity and art, but I don't think most people are kind of at the level where that could really be an attainable option for them.
Yeah. So as far as like real estate investing, did you say that you worked with like an actual real estate investor, or you joined a group, or how did you kind of do that?
I've done both. So I did my own investing property. And then when I got to a place where what I was doing was I was taking my bonuses and then deciding that I wanted to leverage my money with more access. So then I started working with a commercial real estate investor, where you had to be what's called an accredited investor, which means you have to have a certain amount of money liquid, a certain amount of money outside. Your net worth had to be at a certain level outside of your home. Your home couldn't be included in that number, so you had to qualify. But then that way they kind of do all of the heavy lifting for you, and I just get checks once a month for the rent distribution. So usually what they do is they streamline it a little bit on the lower end so they can figure out how much they can give you depending on capital improvements. And then they might, sometimes I get a 13th check if there's overage, but rather than having to take money back from you, they give you a little bit less on a monthly basis. Mm-hmm. So I would really say for most people, depending on where you live, the forms of investing, I really think the entry level would be the stock market in some fashion, whether or not you take $50 a month and you put it into, you work with an asset manager. So for example, like American Funds, BlackRock, Nuveen, MFS, there's all these big asset manager companies that you can open accounts directly with them in most cases, and you can do it auto contributions where every month you're putting a certain dollar amount in. I just think you need to have somebody guide you as to which funds to pick and how the selection process goes. So back to the whole kind of loop it together, whether you're at a point where you can hire a financial advisor or not, I think you need to have somebody in your network that you can draw from, because when you start to get out into this world of making these decisions, it really is, it's not a one size fits all approach. It's not like going to the Apple store and, do you want 84 gig or 110 gigs? Do you want a terabyte? Do you want, it's really not that, it can't be that basic, because it's so personal to all of us, and everybody's appetite for risk is slightly different, and their tolerance for loss is different as well. So yes. I think most people need to start with kind of traditional investing, if you will.
I like how you talk about the differences in risk, because I mean, and this is just, my take on things, because I'm a very risky, I would say, investor, and my husband is very conservative. So we always have to have that conversation on how, like, okay, where's this money going to go? Where's this money going to go? And so even us within our family dynamic have very different views based on where we feel our money should go. But we do, come up with a kind of a common middle ground. But it's just very interesting that, there is, it's just like picking a coach or picking a doctor or things like that. It is a very personal experience, and it's different from person to person. I would not say that it's a one size fits all. So to kind of start wrapping things up, can you tell us what's coming up next for you? What are you working on?
Sure. So I have a book coming out in probably about 2 months. Might be a little sooner. It's with my publisher at the moment. And it's basically all things money. And my audience is women. At all different levels in their financial journey. And then I have a podcast that's going to be coming at the end of summer that just will be talking about just continuing the dialogue. At some point, I am playing with the idea of doing a blog down the road about finances. I Googled, because I was just curious, the 5 most frequently asked questions, and it was 3 of them had to do with money. One was how to write a check, which I thought, oh my gosh, that's an interesting,
Oh my God.
like that's super interesting. Where's my tax refund and what's a FICO score? And so it really made me like stop and pause that, like, if those are like 3 of the 5 most Googled questions, like there's really a bigger void for education in this space. So I think, I just, more than anything, I just want to empower women to be their own ambassador. And I really think that regardless of what your status is, you need to know these things. And I was talking to a potential client the other day, or a prospect, and I asked a couple of questions, and she said, I let my husband do all of that. And my first thought to her was I had an Aaron Brockovich moment where like I still wanted to start rattling off numbers. I'm like, I can tell you the exact dollar amount of my bank account right now. I can tell you my FICO score. I can tell you my profit and loss for my business. I can tell you the amount of money I have in my daughter's 529 account. Like I'm like rattling through all these numbers, and I'm like, when she says to the guy, after all those numbers, I'm guessing you don't want my phone number. Like I'm thinking to myself, like, how can you not have any culpability in this endeavor with your husband? What happens if something happens to him? And I think that's what drives my passion, is when the something happens, then all of a sudden somebody's scrambling and you're at your most vulnerable state, whether it's divorce, death, sickness, tragedy, in any form, you're at your most vulnerable state. So that's not the time that you want to be trying to find things, trying to guess, and then relying that somebody's going to have your best interests at heart. Because unfortunately, what I've learned in my time on this earth is that sadly, most people's best interest is their own. And so you have to be very mindful of who you link arms with, especially when it comes to your finances. And I unfortunately have seen a lot of advisors take advantage of clients, which I'm almost the opposite. It bothers me so much that I put myself maybe second, because I just feel like there's got to be somebody that kind of buffers the things that you should ask an advisor. Like, how do you get paid? What's the embedded commission in this product? What's your responsibility to me ongoing? So I just feel like there's those kinds of things. People don't know what questions to ask. And it kind of lights my soul on fire to kind of empower people to have that. So those are some of the things I have in the pipeline.
I'm so excited. Okay, so my last question, and this is because you just said that, but so for those who are looking at, hiring a financial advisor or starting the very first beginning steps of that, what would you say are the top 3 to 5 questions to ask somebody when you're meeting with a financial advisor?
So I would ask, what is their overall investment philosophy? Why? How are they compensated? Where's their value? And one of my favorite quotes by Warren Buffett is, in the absence of value, cost becomes an issue. How have their portfolios performed in down markets? A lot of advisors run their own portfolios. Like, have they beta tested their own? What does their personal investment profile look like? Do they invest in what they sell? Do they stand by? Do they have that much confidence? So one of the things I tell clients all the time, you want to look at my account, I will show you. I own everything you own. If I won't buy it, I'm not going to sell it to you. So I think the integrity behind that speaks volumes. And then the very first thing I share with people is, this is how I'm compensated. And I'm never going to call you because I'm trying to book a commission, because this is my compensation package. So I'm just very, very transparent. But I think the final thing I would say is, one of the questions I think is super important to ask is, what is your time commitment to me? What is your accountability back to me? So I, obviously I'm a mom, so of a toddler, so life is busy, but I get back to people very quickly. I don't leave people hanging, especially I can tell you a couple, maybe 2 weeks ago, the market was down 600 plus points in a day. And I have clients that are nervous Nellies. I have clients that, watch this stuff way too closely. And what I mean by that is, there's so much access that if you log into your account every single day and watch your values fluctuate, I think you make yourself crazy. But some people do it, but I'm always talking people off the ledge. I'm always accessible. I don't, your money is just as important to me, and your success is just as important to me. So you want to make sure you link arms with an advisor that is 100% on the same playing field that you are in terms of expectations. Because I see a lot of advisors that the markets have been relatively good for the last decade, so they're kind of resting on their laurels and they're not really engaged. I know people that work maybe 8 days a month, and which I'm like, how do you work 8 days a month? But when things are so fluid, but you just want to make sure that they're there and that they're responding to you. And if they're not there, they have a team around them that's going to support you. So those would be the big things I would say that you should ask.
I love it. This is perfect. This is amazing. I could go on and on and on. We might have to do a part 2 of this because I have so many more questions that I would love to ask you, but I know we're coming up on our time here. So what do you want to leave our listeners with today, and how can they get in contact with you?
Well, I think you can link my Instagram. My website is in construction at the moment, so that's super exciting. But I think you can link my Instagram. And what I've been doing is focusing on a topic a week and going into it. So next week I'm tackling credit cards. So if your audience wants to listen, I welcome them into my community. But I think what I would like to leave people with is this. I grew up in a really modest means. I had really everything telling me that I shouldn't be where I'm at today. And here I am. So my biggest takeaway for those listening is you can do so much more than some limiting belief that's been described to you by society, by yourself, by a family member. And really, you are your own ambassador, and becoming your own financial CEO is so doable no matter what structure or gauge you're at in life. And it really just starts with making some small changes to make some long-term successes for your future.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for taking the time and doing this podcast with me today. I'm sure the listeners enjoyed it as much as I did. You are a wealth of knowledge. I love this.
I hope so. I'm so fired up about wanting to help women, because I feel like there's that, I think, I know it's this is the last thing I'll say. One of the things I've noticed over the course of my career and working with women and couples and every different iteration is that women won't ask questions if they feel like they don't know how to ask the question, or they're not going to sound smart. And so they kind of just follow the dots of what's presented to them, but they walk out of the meeting going, what did I just buy? What did I just do? And then they're second guessing themselves. So I just want to eliminate that doubt and just help people know how to ask the questions, how to step into the vibration, and how to get to their goal. So I'll shut up now.
No, it's perfect. It's perfect, because I was one of those people that was too afraid to ask for help, and I would put things on credit cards because I didn't know, you know what I mean? And I'd leave these places going, what the heck did I just buy? I have no idea. Even buying a car, going through when I bought my first car and had a car loan, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. All I know is I had to send a check to this place at this day and this time. That was it. You know what I mean? I was too afraid to ask for the inner workings of what that looked like, versus now I'm hey, what am I getting myself into? Explain me the details. So I love that. And I love that you're just all about empowering women in all things money. It's just like you said in the beginning. So again, yes, thank you. And once your book and podcast and everything is up and running, I'm also going to share all of that with this audience, but I will link your contact information in the show notes so everybody can follow along with you on Instagram. So one last time.
I appreciate that so much. Thank you.
Yes.
It's always a pleasure.
Yep. I loved this. So thank you. And anybody who was listening to this podcast, if you enjoyed this episode, please screenshot, share with a friend, tag Laynie and me on Instagram. Let everybody know what you loved most about this podcast. Thank you for listening to the Confidence Coach podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I want to invite you to leave a 5-star review and share what you loved most about this episode. You can also screenshot and share it on social media. Tag me at sasha.davis. And if you're looking for additional resources, head on over to sashadavis.com. Check out ways that you can work with me and all the free resources that are available to you. Have a kick-ass day.